Hello everyone, this is Jason from Prime Time Aquatics, and today we're going to be doing another fish tank filter showdown. This time we're going to be comparing a sponge filter to an under gravel filter, so stay tuned. Alright everybody, so one of our most watched videos is when we compared a sponge filter to a hang on the back filter, and since that time we've had a lot of suggestions asking us to do a sponge filter versus under gravel filter. Now, we're going to start out with the sponge filter. Here we have one here. We go over this in the sponge filter versus hang on the back filter video as well, so I will put a card in the upper right hand corner so you can check that one out as well. So sponge filters, advantages. They're really simple. You've got a sponge, you've got an uplift tube, you've got usually a weighted base, and the whole idea is you run air through the sponge filter, and as you do that, the sponge filter will suck in water around it, and you'll have microbes growing on all the surface area here. Relatively straightforward. That's how a sponge filter works. Now, these things, advantages. Cheap, all right, something this size. This is tiny. I just used this because it would be easy to put on video and work with. These things are relatively cheap. You can find them anywhere from just a few dollars, maybe $5, $6, $7 for some of the larger ones. So they're cheap. That's certainly an advantage. There's no moving parts. That's a great advantage. There's really nothing to break. They're super easy to clean, so you can just kind of squeeze them out. A lot of people squeeze them out in tank water gently so they don't ruin the actual sponge itself. And generally speaking, that's how you clean it. You might have to clean these things maybe once every couple of weeks or so. But that's pretty much it when it comes to maintaining them. So they're really cheap, easy to clean, easy to maintain. You just need this thing plus a pump and you're in pretty good shape. These things are also really good if you're raising fry. You're not going to have to worry about fry getting sucked up into an intake like you would with a hang on the back or maybe a canister filter. These sometimes, like shrimp and small fry, might actually pick food off of these things. So really simple to use, really cheap, relatively safe for your fish. Alright, so what are some disadvantages of a sponge filter? I think the biggest one is the fact that they lack mechanical filtration. We've talked about this before. There are three types of filtration. There is mechanical filtration, the ability of a filter to pull stuff out of a water column to make your water appear clear. There's biological filtration, and that is the ability of a filter to house beneficial bacteria so that the nitrogen cycle can be completed in your tank. And then of course there is chemical filtration, which will pull out impurities in the water. And again, these things, biological filtration is excellent, lots of surface area here, so to keep the nitrogen cycle moving. Mechanical filtration, in my opinion, is fairly weak compared to other types of filters. And then of course, when you're talking about chemical filtration, yes, there are specialized types of sponge filters where you can add things like activated carbon, but for the most part, the chemical filtration is going to be close to non-existent. Alright, so let's talk about the under gravel filter. What I have here is a small little tank, and just for the demonstration purposes of this video, I've got a very small under gravel filter which fits inside of this tank. Again, it was easier to work with these things as they're small. If you've got a larger tank like a 20 long, 29, 20 gallon, whatever, they're usually going to be in larger rectangular sizes, but the concept is the same. The way an under gravel filter works is you take the under gravel filter plate, this thing, and put it on the bottom of your tank. And so now we've got this thing here, and it's laying on the bottom of the tank. There's a little bit of space underneath, and then what you would normally do is you would take some type of an uplift tube. Usually they're clear. I don't have a clear one, so for the demonstration purposes of this video, I've got this piece of PVC. It would work just fine, but often people, just for aesthetics, they would use a clear uplift tube, but that would go in right into the hole here, like so. And then they would drop an air stone in here, and usually there's an elbow, and run air through here. And the idea is when you do that, the air is going to come out, it's going to bubble out to the surface, and as that happens, water flow is going to be sucked through the substrate and then up through this uplift tube. Alright, so let's talk about some of the advantages of an under gravel filter. One, again, it's really simple. There are no moving parts. You can use an air pump. As long as you've got the uplift tubes, you've got the under gravel filter put in, as long as that air is running, you've got active filtration. You have a decent amount of surface area throughout the substrate. right? So bacteria is attaching to all the pieces of gravel that you have, and that bacteria then is capable of accomplishing the nitrogen cycle. So that's certainly an advantage. And again, it's simple. Now, a big advantage of an under gravel filter compared to a sponge filter, in my opinion, is aesthetics. The only thing you're really going to see with an under gravel filter are those uplift tubes. You don't have the sponge filter in the tank taking up space. You don't have the sponge filter in the tank kind of making it look, well, like a tank with a sponge filter. Of course, other advantages, again, if you've got fry in the tank, you don't have to worry about the fry getting sucked in through an intake tube and into an impeller or something like that. You don't have to necessarily worry about if a power outage happens. For both the under gravel filters and the sponge filters, usually air pumps, when the power goes out, they just power right back on without any issues, where sometimes if you have a hang on the back filter, they may stall out, they may not restart. Canister filters may do the same thing, and so that can create a big time problem if you're away on vacation or you're away at work. Power goes out and now your filtration has been out for hours and hours and hours. With the filtration that's run by air, both sponge filters and under gravel filters, that's not going to be nearly as big of an issue. So what are some of the disadvantages of under gravel filters? We have 54 tanks in our fish room, and out of all 54, throughout our history, I have run under gravel filters on only 2 of them, on a 75 and then a 150, because way back in the day when we bought those tanks, they actually came equipped with under gravel filters. There are some disadvantages to under gravel filters. Disadvantage number 1, like the sponge filter, you're not going to get a ton of mechanical filtration. All right, there still might be some particulate matter floating around in the water column, and generally speaking, the under gravel filters aren't going to produce enough water flow to pull that stuff in the gravel optimally. It will do so, but it's not nearly as good as maybe a hang on the back filter or a canister filter. So both filters, whether it's a sponge filter or under gravel filter, are going to have issues with mechanical filtration. Biological filtration is going to be fairly strong. Both sponge filters and under gravel filters have a fair amount of surface area, and that surface area will grow beneficial bacteria, which will allow the nitrogen cycle to occur. From a chemical filtration perspective, as I've already mentioned, sponge filters are relatively poor. The under gravel filters are pretty poor as well. They do sell some of the elbows at the top of the intake tubes where they can put activated carbon in those, and that can certainly help. Those have to be replaced frequently, but there is some chemical filtration that can happen. Of course, you could put one of those elbows on a sponge filter as well, but overall, the chemical filtration is not going to be optimal. I think there are 3 huge disadvantages to under gravel filters, and those disadvantages are great enough to keep us from using them in our fish room. Major disadvantage number 1, if you are keeping fish that dig, the minute they dig a giant hole in the gravel and leave all that under gravel filter exposed, the water flow that is occurring is now going to go through that dug out area instead of going through the gravel, and you will lose a lot of your beneficial bacteria potentially. All right, so that's a big problem. You are really limited to the types of fish you can keep in a tank with an under gravel filter. And so for us, we keep a fair amount of cichlids, and they dig. And so if I've got a tank like with my Oscars or the tilapia or some of my Mbuna cichlids, they're going to dig through the gravel, and they're going to render that under gravel filter pretty much, I wouldn't say useless, but a whole lot less effective. So that's major disadvantage number 1. You really have to be careful about the fish that you keep the minute you put that under gravel filter in, because if they dig, it's going to be far less useful. A disadvantage number 2, in my opinion, is the amount of fish waste that gets caught under the filter. Now, people have devised ways to be able to suck that out, whether that's putting a smaller tube through one of the large uplift tubes and getting all that stuff out from the bottom. But the bottom line is this: when you've got a lot of fish waste under that filter plate, it's very difficult to remove. And that creates a lot of nitrates in the water column, which can lead to algae issues. The third major disadvantage, at least for us, is if you ever decide to maybe want to change the fish that you're keeping, or you don't want the under gravel filter in there any longer, getting that out is a major pain. You really do have to break down the entire tank to remove the under gravel filter. We recently did it about, maybe 6 months ago in our 75-gallon tank, and it was a pain. We had to pull all the gravel out, remove the under gravel filter, put all the gravel back in, all the plants, all the decorations, all the fish came back in. It stirred up all kinds of stuff. So it's a major, major pain to get that out if you ever decide to remove it. Now, if you don't want it anymore, can you leave it in, remove the uplift tubes, and just leave it under the substrate? Yes, but again, you've got that same issue where you're probably going to get some detritus and some fish waste all trapped underneath that plate. And even with a gravel vac, it's very difficult to get that out once it's in there. All right, so the bottom line is if I had to choose between a sponge filter and an under gravel filter, which one do I choose? I choose this every single time. I recognize that it doesn't look as nice as an under gravel filter. You've got this sponge that is visible, but the ease of maintenance, ease of cleaning, the cost, the ability to remove it. If I want to put a canister filter or a hang-on back filter, I can just take this out, replace it with a different type of filtration, much easier to deal with. I really don't want to have to deal with trying to remove under gravel filter plates if and when I want to change things up. So I would probably go this direction. Again, the under gravel filters are great. If you're someone who's like, I really love tetras and angelfish and I've got a bunch of fish that I know are not going to dig through my substrate, the under gravel filter is a potentially really good choice. But for us, we like to use our tanks interchangeably. Sometimes we've got cichlids, sometimes we don't. And I want that freedom to be able to put whatever I want in the tank and not have to worry. All right, everyone, so that's just my opinion. I would love to hear yours as well. Leave that in the comments section below. Do you have a preference, sponge filter or under gravel filter? If you've used the under gravel filters before, share your experience. Do you like them? Do you not like them? If so, why? Why not? So if you like this video, share, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.